Strive to be a leader of character, competence, and courage. Lead from the front. Say, follow me, and then lead the way. Stay in top physical shape. Physical stamina is the root of mental toughness. Develop your team. If you know your people, are fair in setting realistic goals and expectations, and lead by example, you will develop teamwork. Delegate responsibility to your subordinates and let them do their jobs. You can't do a good job if you don't have a chance to use your imagination or your creativity. Anticipate problems and prepare to overcome obstacles. This is the first part of a quote that really resonates with me when we are talking about the role of leadership. And I think this episode is going to be particularly interesting to men. I think you could apply a lot of these ideas to pretty much any category, workplace, or even within your own family or your community. These values, very simply character, competence, and courage, are, I think, key values that we need to instill in ourselves to become proper leaders. I worked in the video game industry from roughly 2019 to 2023, and it was a topic that became very clear to me that was not being spoken about in any meaningful way. In fact, a lot of the problems that we see in the modern day video game industry, especially in the larger studios, is the widespread failure of leadership. In fact, the signs of bad leadership are everywhere. And in the years since I've left the industry, at least formally, I would say that this quote strikes at the heart of some of the major issues that we're seeing. I'm going to finish the rest of the quote, and I think you might be surprised to learn who it's from and in what context. This is part 2. Don't wait until you get to the top of the ridge and then make up your mind. Remain humble. Don't worry about who receives the credit. Never let power or authority go to your head. Take a moment of self-reflection. Look at yourself in the mirror every night and ask yourself if you did your best. True satisfaction comes from getting the job done. The key to a successful leader is to earn respect, not because of rank or position, but because you are a leader of character. Hang tough. Never, ever give up. This is a quote from Major Dick Winters. You may be familiar with his name if you've ever watched Band of Brothers or read any of his books from his time serving in the European theater during World War II. I was reflecting about leadership a lot at the end of the last episode, and to be honest, I was kind of stuck with where to take the conversation next. And it just came to mind the other day when I was taking a drive. Dick Winters, actually. I was always a huge fan of the Band of Brothers show, and I think about a lot of guys that, in my life that have watched it, and we often talk about some of our favorite scenes, and I think there's just a lot that resonates with men. And I think there's some obvious ones, the brotherhood of, standing side by side and, fighting against this greater evil and never giving up. I think there's a lot of admirable values that are portrayed. But I was thinking about it on a deeper level. And what is it that maybe we all really love about it, but can't quite put our finger on? And I think it relates to this idea of leadership. I think Band of Brothers is, at its highest level, a story of good men who lead by example. I think if we look at what those men endured during World War II, those men, as I talked about in episode 1, they had courage in the face of the greatest struggle we could ever imagine. what they endured, the terror, the horror of the things that they saw, they were experiencing suffering on a physical, emotional, and spiritual level that I just don't think in the modern day we can truly comprehend. And through it all, this deep sense of eternal brotherhood and love, and a building of trust, a reliance on their fellow man. And I think what's maybe most interesting is this superhuman courage to face death itself. Now, these are extreme scenarios. These are events that have happened in the past that a modern man, for the most part, cannot truly comprehend. But I think struggle and suffering in our age, it only appears differently. I think we can empathize with the plight of those men, and maybe to some degree we romanticize the bond that they faced in this ultimate darkness. But I want to say, I don't think it's any less significant in our lives. How it appears, those men faced their adversity on the beaches of Normandy and in the heart of German territory in the final waning days of their war, but we face our own struggles now, and I encourage you not to dismiss them outright because they may not in your mind measure up to something more obvious. So, what am I saying with all this? Well, Band of Brothers, yes, is a story of good men who lead by example, but it also highlighted the cost of bad leadership. And I think in the men underneath both great leaders and bad leaders, we got to see the outward effect of that leadership to the point of costing lives. I want to talk today a little bit about that and seeing it myself in the companies that I've worked for and even in my own life. Because the reality is the cost of a bad leader doesn't stop with the person who's incapable. It radiates outward, affecting lives in our immediate vicinity and even further in ways we can't even imagine. Welcome to the Sons of Men podcast, a conversation dedicated to meaning in the lives of men, offering a window into the trials of masculinity where we talk about family, spirituality, creativity, and legacy to better understand each other and to offer solutions for the next generation in an increasingly shallow and hostile world. I'm your host, Curtis Wiebe, a father and husband, addict in lifelong recovery, and an advocate for men struggling in the shadow of suffering. This is episode 3, Band of Brothers. I think regardless of how you view leadership, I think there is a fundamental truth about regardless of how you enact it, you are leading by example. You will teach those around you how to behave. And in a broken structure or a structure that is led by a ineffectual or broken man, it creates a system that is self-perpetuating, which I think is maybe the most dangerous aspect about this, is that it trains minds that this is the key to success. Now, we've talked a lot about success. What does that mean? But I think for today, I want to focus on the characteristics of bad men who lead by fear. I think it all stems from a topic that I have covered through each of the episodes so far, and that is of pride. Well, I talk a lot about pride. What does that mean? I think there's this assumption that it is arrogance or a demand for respect. But to me, pride actually means placing yourself as the highest good. And in that instance, all things must turn and shape itself to fit into this idea that one might have of themselves. I think all bad leadership stems from this. When everything must be tailored to success in the way you see things. A man who demands worship and loyalty. When I say the term loyalty, I mean that in a way that it is expected and not earned. I find loyalty is a pretty tainted term when it comes to modern leadership. True loyalty comes from good action and service. I'm going to share a story with you about something that I went through actually quite recently. It was my own battle with pride. And it's this sneaky little gremlin that catches up to you without you even realizing. I've been doing all this work on everything that I've talked about in the podcast up till today. I was working on a project this summer where I was invited in as a consultant, and it was a team struggling to make a concept work. I'm not going to go into the details. I just want to talk about the higher level themes. And it was a group of very different and eclectic people, all trying to figure out a way to salvage a project, bring these creative minds together, and create something that could be a great expression and, would ultimately win hearts and minds. It was clear from the first few meetings that I had there that there was a lot of people that were new to this side of the creative process. And in it, I became very frustrated. I started to feel angry. I started to feel this work was beneath me. I remember getting off of a few calls and just walking around the house angrily and ranting and raving and just full of arrogance about my qualifications. Why wouldn't they listen to me? I've been doing this for 20 years. This is my specialty. I'm a writer. There it is again, right? I am a writer. Why won't they listen to my advice? I have the answers. And this went on for a while, and I started to sense this prickliness in the calls the longer that this consultation went on. And in my arrogance, I refused to see that I was the problem. And it wasn't me that realized this. It wasn't this great insight that I had. No. It was my wife just gently saying, hey, maybe this is an issue of pride for you. Well, in the moment, I didn't fully register that, as much as I like to say that I'm a great listener. Well, I'm not always. It did register, though. It did stick in my mind, and I continued working, and I got more frustrated, and I started becoming a problem. The rest of the team was really trying to make things work and pull this vision together. And even if I was right, what was I doing to help? It was not long after that one of the team members that had brought me in to help had a conversation, just the two of us. And again, I'm so grateful to this friend, to this brother, for speaking honestly from his heart. And he really challenged me a few days after my wife had gently nudged me to empathize with the plight of this team we were working with. They were under a lot of pressure. They had incredible demands from their managers, and they had a short time to do it, and they really needed everyone to galvanize and come together. And that sat in my heart. And I have to admit, it stung a little. He wasn't condemning me, but I think he was asking me, play ball. We need this to work. He helped me see the error in my thinking. And that is a good leader. So I thought about it, and I realized that my pride had taken over. And out of that pride, out of this heart that wants to lead, I started to destroy. Because I couldn't put aside my own arrogance long enough to see how I could help these people with my expertise, Was I willing to implode an entire project because I couldn't just contribute in a meaningful way that was toward what they were building because I had a better answer, I thought? And then I started thinking, boy, that would really radiate outward. What if it got canceled? What if all these people lost this opportunity for 6 months to a year of work because I just couldn't stop myself from being the cynic, from being the guy who's got to be right? Well, that's pride. I had to admit that I was wrong. I had to let go. And again, I want to thank that friend. You know who you are. Because it wasn't just in this job that it changed my perspective. I started to realize it had been crawling back into my life for a little while, since the beginning of the summer. And it was such a great course correction. Now, there's still a cost to that pride. I basically was removed from the project, and I fully understand. But what an opportunity I could have had. What a great chance to really connect with some other creative people. And even though we were all different, we could have learned from each other. We could have taught each other. But my actions removed me from that opening, from that possibility of growth. I say all this because it really is important. The number one thing you as a leader must remember, the cure for pride, is humility. We can battle against all of these voices that rise up whenever we feel slighted. You know, I've made it this far. I've earned it. Maybe you have some gaps in your knowledge that you could benefit from the wisdom of a coworker or even someone underneath you. No one deserves my expertise. These people are beneath me. I'm incredible at this job. Why would I waste my time? Humble yourself. Sure, maybe they don't deserve your best. Maybe they deserve a 4 out of 10. Give them the best 4 out of 10 that you can give them. Help them. Humble yourself. Another thing that I've noticed in my time working at companies, I've been a freelancer for most of my life, but a lot of these ideas came out from a 4-year period in a more corporate setting. What I've noticed is jealousy. And it kind of ties into pride. I think, like I said, bad leadership all stems out of pride for the most part. And these are kind of supplementary things that are directly an outflowing of it. But there's this sense of, if someone else gets promoted, well, that's my title. I should have that. It's also an inability to be open to new ideas, possibilities. This thing that I really recognized in so many meetings, my idea. It's not the good idea. It's not the best idea, but that wasn't my idea. And everything has to go towards that one idea of this jealous person that can't let other people succeed. And that kind of leads to a petty heart. You can't celebrate other people's successes. You have to, as a good leader, love to see people succeed. And celebrate if they succeed beyond even you, outward into the world. As a good leader, you want to train and raise up those that come to you for mentorship and for training so that they go on to be a bigger success. It's how the world gets better. It's how we get more qualified people. It's how we have more competent people and how businesses become more successful. And all of that is an outpouring of a man who's not afraid to be selfless. Selflessness is a cure for jealousy. The third is fear. And I think maybe is something that we can all identify with, both in people that we have followed in leaders that we have had to work for or serve, but also in ourselves. I'd love to hear from you on this because it's something I think about a lot and I talk to a lot of men about, but I think it's a really important conversation. And that is, why are we afraid to fail? We cannot fail. We hold this standard of excellence, of success. But failure is something we just cannot allow. I think failure is paramount to wisdom. Learning from those experiences, admitting that we didn't succeed. I look at the last 6 months of my time in Sweden, and I guess you could write the word failure across it. I started a business in a downturn in the industry that I was working in. I worked really hard to make it work. I really wanted to stay in Sweden, but it didn't work. And I suppose you could call it a failure. I suppose you could. But out of that, I learned so much about myself, and our family learned a lot about each other, what we were capable of, what we could endure. And it brought us together, I think, in a really powerful way. And that only happened because something failed, something didn't work. There's also this fear of being exposed, maybe, for incompetence. Let's be real. We've all dealt with incompetence in the workplace. It's extremely frustrating. It's often covered up. People are thrown under the bus. And if you just think about it, if that person could just say, hey, I'm in over my head, I could use some help. Who wouldn't step up and help? Who wouldn't stand there next to that person and say, hey, I got your back. Let's get this done. There's bullying, this petty behavior of weak men, bullying each other, bullying people out of the group because they ask hard questions, ousting, isolating, all because they're afraid that maybe that person asking the hard questions could expose them, that they don't have the answer. But you know what? It's okay not to know. It's okay to say, I don't have the answers. People respect that. They respect that honesty. So what's the cure to fear? Vulnerability. I think it's important just to take a sidebar here for a moment and talk a little bit about vulnerability. I had a really interesting conversation with a brother of mine, a friend in Stockholm. And when we talked about the word vulnerability, he saw the word as being exposed to people who use it as a weakness, who exploit it. And when I'm talking about vulnerability, I'm talking about being honest and unafraid to bare your soul or to admit your shortcomings. But I think both words are equally valid. A good man with a good heart empowers through vulnerability, builds up, supports. But a bad leader leverages vulnerability, exploits what they would see as a weakness. So I'm never not going to encourage vulnerability, but it is very important to be aware that pick and choose your battles. Some people are worth the vulnerability, and there will be a reward that comes out of it. But be careful with who you place that vulnerability, my brothers. The last tenet of a bad leader is control. I think this can be the most scary, and Dick Winters talks about it in his quote from the beginning of the episode about trusting your subordinates to do their job. Trust. Again, out of vulnerability comes trust. I saw in my experiences extreme paranoia, distrust, stubbornness. Every action was questioned. When you create an environment of fear out of pride, it creates a terrible and toxic workplace. Every action is questioned. There can be no good intent when you are setting the example that this kind of behavior is rewarded. So encouragement, questioning, new ideas, these can only be seen as threats or a grab at power. And it creates a catastrophic cycle. It also leads to rigidity, closed off nature, this kind of choking atmosphere where nobody is free to speak their mind. They quietly agree and then go off into dark corners and complain and commiserate. And it creates a fractured structure. Again, humility. And I'm going to tell you, your idea isn't the best. It's probably fine, but I'm sure there's someone else around you who has a better idea. The cure for this desire for control, to oversee every single aspect, it can be cured by trust. A man who must control every aspect of his life and everything around him to tailor the world to the way he wants it is the weakest man. These are a lot of things to consider, but what does this all mean? I'm sure you've been sitting there going, that's my boss. That's that guy at work that I can't stand. That's him. You've nailed him. You've nailed him to a T. And you're going to tell your friends and your coworkers, you should listen to this because, yeah, this is our boss. But I want you to look at yourself. How many of these 4 topics are present in your life? Doesn't even need to be at work. What kind of leader are you at home with your wife and your kids, with your community? Are you humble? Are you vulnerable in the right way? Do you trust those around you? Are you selfless? Do you do things for the sake of others to raise them up and to empower them? Keep it simple and answer those questions honestly. And as I said last time, ask a brother to have an honest assessment. I think the more open we are, the more trusting we are, the more humble we are, the easier it is for us to accept criticism, to admit I failed, to admit I was wrong, to admit I need help. And only then can we start to grow as men into a place of leadership. And it's with those words that we can lead graciously by example. And I think that is the most important of all. We can talk all day long, but do those words match your action? Because that's what people look to. They look to the actions that you take. And if those aren't aligned, they see the hypocrisy. And you've become a bad leader. It's an expression of a weak man. Align your words and your actions. Lead by example. Thank you for listening to the Sons of Men podcast. Leadership is something that I'm going to come back to time and again because we live in a critical time where these types of behaviors are universally accepted, but we don't understand why we're so infuriated, why we feel powerless. We are living and working in structures that are broken by men who are broken and cannot admit that they are. So I challenge you. Admit that you're broken. Admit that you don't have all the answers. and admit where you failed. And out of that comes wisdom. God bless.